Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we are going to deal with Nicomachean Ethics. The Nicomachean Ethics is the name normally given to Aristotle's best-known work on ethics. The work, which plays a preeminent role in defining Aristotelian ethics, consists of 10 books, originally separate scrolls, and is understood to be based on notes from his lectures at the Lyceum. Nicomachean Ethics is a philosophical inquiry into the nature of the good life for a human being. Aristotle begins the work by positing that there exists some ultimate good toward which, in the final analysis, all human actions ultimately aim. The necessary characteristics of the ultimate good are that it is complete, final, self-sufficient and continuous. This good toward which all human actions implicitly or explicitly aim is happiness in Greek, eudaimonia, which can also be translated as blessedness or living well, and which is not a static state of being but a type of activity. To discover the nature of human happiness, it is necessary to determine what the function of a human being is, for a person's happiness will consist in fulfilling the natural function toward which his being is directed. This natural function must be something which is specific to human beings, which is essential to being human. A person is primarily his intellect. While the spirited and desiring parts of the soul are also important, the rational part of the soul is what one can most properly consider a person's identity. The activity which only human beings can perform is intellectual. It is activity of the highest part of the soul according to reason. Human happiness therefore consists in activity of the soul according to reason. In practical terms, this activity is expressed through ethical virtue when a person directs his actions according to reason. The very highest human life, however, consists in contemplation of the greatest goods. More will be said later on this topic, which is the culmination of the ethics. Ethical virtue is a habit disposed toward action by deliberate choice, being at the mean relative to us and defined by reason as a prudent man would define it. Each of the elements of this definition are important. Virtue is not simply an isolated action but a habit of acting well. For an action to be virtuous, a person must do it deliberately, knowing what he is doing and doing it because it is a noble action. In each specific situation, the virtuous action is a mean between two extremes. Finally, prudence is necessary for ethical virtue because it is the intellectual virtue by which a person is able to determine the means specific to each situation. The first virtue discussed is bravery. It is a mean between rashness and cowardice. A brave man is one who faces and fears what he should for the right reason, in the right manner and the right time. A brave man performs his actions for the sake of what is noble. A brave man is thus one who is fearless in facing a noble death. The next virtue is temperance. It is a mean with regard to bodily pleasures. The intemperate man desires pleasurable things and chooses them because they are pleasurable. He is pained when he fails to get what he desires. A temperate man is moderately disposed with regard to pleasures and pains. He loves such pleasures as right reason dictates. Temperance keeps the desiring part of the soul in harmony with reason. Generosity is the third virtue which Aristotle examines. With regard to property, generosity is a mean between wastefulness and stinginess. A generous man will give to the right person, the right amount, and at the right times. He will also take proper care of his possessions. Generosity does not depend on the quantity of the giving, but on the habit of the giver, which takes into account the amount which the giver himself has and is able to give away. The next virtue is munificence, which consists giving large amounts for suitable occasions. The deficiency of this virtue is called meanness, and the excess is ostentation. A munificent man spends gladly and lavishly, not calculating costs, but always for a noble purpose. Magnanimity, the fifth virtue Aristotle discusses, is one of the peaks of virtues. A magnanimous man claims and deserves great honors. Someone who deserves honors but doesn't claim them is low-minded, and someone who claims honors but does not deserve them is vain. It is better to be vain than low-minded, because vanity will be naturally corrected by life experience. A magnanimous man is greatly in each of the virtues and a sort of ornament of virtues, because he shows how good a virtuous life is. The next virtue concerns honor, specifically small and medium honors. It is a mean between too much and too little ambition, which can be described as right ambition. The virtue that is a mean with respect to anger is good temper. The excesses are irascibility or bitterness. If one is irascible, he gets angry quickly and retaliates, but then forgets about it. Someone who is bitter holds anger for a long time. A good-tempered man is one who becomes angry on the right occasions, with the right people, at the right time, for the right length of time. The next three virtues are friendliness, the mean between flattery or obsequiousness and quarrelsomeness; truthfulness, the mean between boastfulness and self-depreciation; and wit, the mean with regard to humor and amusement. The wit entails saying the right things in the right manner and also listening to things properly. The last virtue, which unites and orders all of the other virtues, is justice. Justice can also be considered in a more specific sense as one of the virtues. Both justice in the specific sense and justice as the whole of virtue are defined in relation to other people, but justice in the specific sense is concerned with honor, property, safety, and similar things, while justice is the larger sense and it is concerned with virtue as a whole. Another subset of justice is distributive justice. Justice is a mean between two extremes of unfairness. What is just in distribution should be in some way according to merit, but not all agree what the merit should be. Advocates of mob rule say that this merit is freedom. Oligarchs say that it is wealth. Others say it is good ancestry. And aristocrats say that is virtue. Prudence is the intellectual virtue of practical reason. It is concerned with human actions and gives a person the ability to choose what the virtues mean is in specific situations. Acquiring prudence requires time and experience. Prudence and ethical virtue are both necessary for one another. Friendship is a necessary part of the good life. There are three types of friendship: friendship based on usefulness, friendship based on pleasure, and friendship based on virtue. Only the last type is genuine friendship. Friendships based on usefulness and pleasure tend not to be very enduring, since they only last as long as each party derives the usefulness or pleasure he desires from the relationship. Friendship based on virtue is based on wishing the good for the other person. This genuine friendship is necessary for self-knowledge and helps both of the friends to grow in virtue. Friendship presupposes justice and goes beyond it. The virtue of a friend is to love. The relationship one has with a friend is like the harmonious relationship between the different parts of the soul of a virtuous man. Man's highest action and most complete happiness is a life of contemplation of the highest good. Man's intellectual capacity is his highest capacity, and therefore his highest happiness resides in the use of this capacity. The life of contemplation is so sublime that it is practically divine, and man can achieve it only insofar as there is something divine in him. Contemplation is the action which best fulfills all the qualifications that the ultimate good should have, because it is the most continuous, complete, and self-sufficient of all actions. For most people, mere exhortation will not be enough to make them act virtuously. Consequently, good laws are necessary in order to make people virtuous. Laws and proper education are necessarily especially for the young, in order to train their passions and desires to be in accord with reason. Yet, since such a great number of men is not virtuous, laws are necessary not just for the young, but for everyone. Historical context. Aristotle was born at Stagira in North Greece in 384 BC. His father, Nicomachean, was a physician at the court of Philip of Macedon, the father of Alexander the Great. In BC 367, Aristotle moved to Athens, which was the intellectual and cultural center of ancient Greece. He spent many years studying in Plato's academy, surrounded by other philosophers, scientists, and mathematicians. Plato died in 374, and Aristotle left the academy in that same year. There is speculation that he left because Plato had not chosen him as his successor. It is more likely, however, that anti-Macedonian sentiment was growing in Athens, and Aristotle was afraid of being persecuted for his associations with King Philip's court. Over the next 4 years, Aristotle traveled throughout the eastern Aegean area studying and teaching. During this time, he conducted a remarkable array of experiments and observations in the biological sciences. In 343, he was summoned back north to Macedonia to be the personal tutor to the young Alexander the Great. While we know very little about Aristotle's influence on Alexander, there has been a great deal of speculation and mythologizing about the relationship between these two eminent figures. As the Macedonians extended their empire over Greece, it became safe for Aristotle to return to Athens. In 334, he established his own philosophical school at the Lyceum, where he taught for the next 11 years. His lectures covered almost every area of study, including physics, metaphysics, ethics, psychology, politics, and poetry. His pioneering work in logic and biology was not improved upon for 2000 years. In 323, Alexander the Great died, and Aristotle left Athens, fearing another upsurge of anti-Macedonian sentiment. Alluding to the trial and execution of Socrates some 76 years earlier, Aristotle reportedly claimed that he did not wish the same from Athens to sin a second time against philosophy. A year later, he died in Chalcis, in Euboea. Though Aristotle published many admired works in his lifetime, none have survived to the present day. Those works that we do have consists mostly of lecture notes from his courses at the Lyceum. That these works were never intended for publication explains why they are generally dry and hard to follow. The Nicomachean Ethics was likely either edited or dedicated to Aristotle's son Nicomachus. The Greek world of Aristotle's time was made up of small city-states, each with its own autonomous government. The city-state consisted of slaves, non-citizen manual laborers, children, women, aliens, and citizens. The citizens were adult males, most of who had been born to citizen parents themselves. The citizens governed the city, while the slaves, laborers, and women did all the work to provide the necessary food, shelter, and equipment, because they were freed from the necessity of meeting day-to-day needs. Citizens enjoyed a great deal of freedom and luxury as well. The leisure they enjoyed was highly valued and made possible one of the greatest periods of intellectual energy in human history. That the system was exploitative is hardly debatable, but it also produced an incredible array of philosophy, drama, art, and architecture. Aristotle's students were young citizens whose tuition was meant to prepare them for a life of civic duty. There were few enough citizens that everyone in a given city would at least recognize, if not know, one another. All citizens expected to take part in public office. Unlike our modern system of representative democracy, where we simply elect officials to speak for us, all Greek citizens were expected to voice their own opinions in large, deliberate, and judicial assemblies. There was a strong bond of kinship created in citizenship, as the same people lived together, governed together, served in the army together, and enjoyed leisure time together. The age of the city-state came to a close within Aristotle's lifetime, however, due to the efforts of his most famous pupil, Alexander the Great. Alexander came to power in the northern kingdom of Macedonia and within a decade had established one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. When Alexander died, Greece once more became fragmented, but the fierce independence of the city-states was a thing of the past. Greek culture was on the decline, and within a few hundred years, it would be swallowed up by the burgeoning Roman Empire. Philosophical context. As the successor of Socrates and Plato, Aristotle was the last of the great Greek philosophers. Philosophy first flourished in Greece sometime in the early 6th century BC as inquisitive thinkers began developing rational methods for investigating the mysteries of nature and mathematics. The pre-Socratic thinkers were as much scientists and mathematicians as they were philosophers. While there was significant pre-Socratic influence in Aristotle's work, primarily in the sciences and metaphysics, his most significant influence was undoubtedly Plato. Plato's philosophy was centered on his famous theory of forms or theory of ideas. The theory is based on the observation that there must be some universal quality that all things classed under a single name share in common. For instance, a flower is beautiful in a very different way from a human, but both the flower and the human must share something in common if we are able to call them both beautiful. Plato's answer is that they share in common the form of beauty, which is invisible, unchanging, and eternal. Anything that we perceive in this world is beautiful because it participates in some way in the form of beauty. But while beautiful flowers will wilt and beautiful humans will grow old and die, the form of beauty is everlasting and unchanging. Plato theorizes that our world of sensible experience, with its changes and disappointments, is but a poor reflection of the ideal world of pure forms that underlies our experience. The goal of philosophy then is to train the mind to see beyond the veil of experience and to contemplate the true reality of forms that lies behind it. While Aristotle was undoubtedly influenced by Plato, this influence was mostly negative. Most of his works, including the Nicomachean Ethics, involved refutations of many of Plato's theories. Aristotle himself was an empirical scientist who felt that true wisdom comes from examining the objects of experience and not from trying to look beyond them. In the Ethics, he is primarily critical of Plato's form of good. According to Aristotle, there is not a single form by virtue of which all good things are good. Instead, he discusses at length multiplicity of the various virtues. Aristotle's work in the Ethics is deeply informed by his own work in the Sciences and Metaphysics. In terms of impact on the Ethics, Aristotle's most significant concept is that of the teleology of nature. According to Aristotle, nature works towards a teleos or end goal. His biological work aims constantly at the question of what purpose different aspects of plants and animals serve. He classifies humans as rational animals, meaning that our telos is rational. In other words, our function in life is to realize our full potential as rational beings. If we are not fully rational, we are falling short of our true nature. The teleological view gives Aristotle's ethics a clear sense of direction. Our goal in life is to achieve our true nature, and this true nature consists essentially of rationality. The purpose of a moral education, then, is to teach us how we may become perfectly rational and immune to the temptations of our lower animalistic parts. Ethics is just one of a number of fields that Aristotle classifies as practical science. Unlike the natural sciences, which examine the world around us, these sciences deal with the practical aspects of human society and how best to arrange the society. The practical sciences are all closely connected, and Aristotle frequently expounds on the connection between the good life for the individual and the kind of state that could make this good life possible. Hence, Aristotle's Politics is an important companion and sequel to his Ethics. While the Nicomachean Ethics is Aristotle's most popular work on ethics, there is a second work called the Eudemian Ethics, which is far less widely read. Most scholars agree that the Eudemian Ethics was written earlier in Aristotle's career and represents a less mature view. Books 5, 6 and 7 of the Nicomachean Ethics are also found in the Eudemian Ethics. Aristotle's influence on Western philosophy is difficult to exaggerate. While his works were lost to the West for many centuries, they were slowly transmitted back into Europe by Arab scholars during the Middle Ages. Thanks mostly to the influence of Saint Thomas Aquinas, Aristotelian philosophy became accepted almost as dogmatically as the Bible during the late Middle Ages. While modern philosophy broke significantly from the scholastic tradition of the Middle Ages, Aristotle's influence remains undiminished. In particular, his emphasis on scientific reasoning and experimentation have been a cornerstone of modern empiricist philosophy. Now try to answer some questions. Explain the philosophy of Aristotle on virtue. Briefly narrate the origin and development of Nicomachean Ethics. What is the impact of Aristotle's influence over Plato? What are the 3 types of friendship according to Nicomachean Ethics? Why happiness is considered as the highest good by Aristotle? Critically analyze implications of Nicomachean Ethics in our day-to-day life. What is the second virtue according to Aristotle? How do Nicomachean Ethics and Eudemian Ethics differ? Now, books for reference. Aristotle's Ethics by David Bostock, Oxford University Press, New York, 2000. Ethics with Aristotle by Sarah Brody, Oxford University Press, New York, 1991. Aristotle's Dialogue with Socrates on the Nicomachean Ethics by Rona Berger, University of Chicago Press, 2008. Reason and Human Good in Aristotle by John M. Cooper, Harvard University Press, Cambridge, 1975. Aristotle's Ethical Theory by W. F. R. Hardy, Oxford University Press, Oxford, 1968. Routledge Philosophy Guidebook to Aristotle on Ethics by Gerald J. Hughes. Thank you for watching today's program. Hope that you have enjoyed this session. Thank you for watching and goodbye.